Hey, you're here with Dr. Jodi, and this is Anxiety. I'm so done with you. I am so excited about this podcast. It's an accompaniment to my book by the same name, Anxiety. I'm so done with you. It's a teen's guide to ditching toxic stress and hardwiring your brain for happiness. Because that is what we're going to do in this series. We're ditching that freaking toxic stress and hardwiring your brain to generate happiness every day. This is what you do. You read or listen to a section of the book, then come on over here and listen to an episode where we're going to go a little bit deeper, give more examples, and tell more stories. I want to give you everything you need to be sure that you find your way out of this horrible anxiety cycle so that you no longer have to suffer. Please leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That'll help me get in the ears of more people who need this series. Mental health problems are skyrocketing, especially among teenagers, and this series is going to change the tide. Hey, welcome to this episode. We have a special treat for you today. This is my nephew, Jude.
Hello.
I'm going to interview Jude because he's a great representative of Generation Z, and we're talking in this season about where anxiety comes from, why we have it so much, what's going on for us biologically and culturally and emotionally and all the things in this season. And so I thought it'd be really great to hear a story from somebody so that you could relate to what's going on. And Jude might ask me some questions, but mostly I'm going to be asking Jude some questions. So let's get started. Anxiety is really different for everybody. Everybody has different feelings on it. I feel like it works on us all in similar ways, but we think about it differently. We experience it differently. We're upset or we're afraid of different things. So give us an introduction to your experience with anxiety.
Yeah, so I think I really started to notice my anxiety and name it as anxiety probably around 16 or 17.
Years old.
Yeah, 16 or 17 years old. But as I look back, I can really recognize it probably from the time I was 4 or 5. I have distinct memories of how I perceive anxiety, right, is kind of like this unconditional worry. And so one of the ways that I remember that expressing most frequently was when I was in the car, and I can remember being very aware of the speed limit, and if my mom or dad were driving 5 or 10 miles over, it would really freak me out. I would get really worried. So that was kind of, when I look back, one of my main introductions to how I understood anxiety.
So can I ask you about that unconditional worry? I love that description. It's
Thank you.
a description I haven't heard from. And I love how people have their experience near way of describing things. Because it's not then a diagnosis or a mental illness. It's like a description of what we're going through.
Right.
Say more about how you came up with the unconditional worry.
Well, I think that's really what happens when I experience anxiety. It's kind of like this train that doesn't stop, where I just kind of go from one thing to the next. And, there's a degree of rumination in there for me, just kind of thinking about it over and over again. But it's not something logical. There's no way for me to stop it logically, that it's kind of run away.
Okay, so the unconditional is mostly like lack of logic.
Yes.
Like it didn't have to be, there was no conditions that caused it. It just is going from one thing to another.
Right, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So when you were 16, 17, you said then it became almost a little bit different than all growing up. Tell us about it.
So I think my relationship to anxiety changed in large part because that's probably about when I started to do therapy. And so, I could really name and explore anxiety in a more concrete way as it applied to myself. And so, part of that work was also looking back at my younger life and looking at that. And it kind of took me a while to really realize how present it's been throughout my life. One characteristic of anxiety for myself is really kind of this, how I hold my stomach, and, it's like I can't relax my stomach. And so as a child, I had like pretty defined abs just because I was always just keeping my stomach in, which is kind of funny, but it's like it's just an interesting way that anxiety expressed itself physically for me, and in whatever way it did.
So it speaks of that tension and maybe a layer of protecting your soft belly by...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's always just kind of been like a place of that I felt anxiety. I think up into my upper chest as well. That's really where I feel it kind of bloom. How do I want to say this? There's like a real energy to it in my chest. I can really feel it and define it as kind of this tightness. And maybe whereas my anxiety expressed in my lower stomach is more like a symptom of the anxiety, like where I feel the anxiety blooming is really in my stomach or in my upper chest.
And then you're saying that you feel like your stomach's squeezing is a response to that feeling, that blooming in the chest.
Yeah, and I think that's, that tenseness is not something that's located just in my stomach. I can remember always just being very high strung as a child, like my shoulder blades were always really far up, and I would have trouble relaxing. I started to become aware of it maybe, I don't know, 9th or 10th grade, when I really started to become aware of how much I tensed up, and I would have to relax myself. And I was just surprised how much further down my arms went, down my body when I would do that. But it's just funny. It's funny how like for a long time it's just ingrained, and then I started putting work behind it, and it would change. But I mean, that's just what I knew. I knew myself being very tense and high up.
What you're describing is you were becoming eventually in 9th, 10th grade, and then in therapy in 16, 17 years old. And how you're describing it now, you're witnessing yourself.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And can you tell us that process of how you started to become an observer of yourself? If that's interesting. I don't know. It's interesting to me.
Yeah.
I know how that affects people. So I'm curious how that affected you.
Yeah, so when I think of becoming an observer of myself, I guess what I think about is metacognition, which is like the ability to be present to your own thoughts, right? It's a shift from this isn't really scientific, but in my head how I would think about it is kind of like this instinct of like, this is how I behave because this is what I do. And then kind of coming into a situation where you can be aware of your thought process as it develops. And so, yeah, I mean, that the ability of being able to really look at the process of my thoughts and how they came to be really changed the way that I was able to think about it. And it's something that I did with professional help. I think it's something I could have done alone, but it was definitely...
how did it change how you thought about it?
Well, I would say until very recently, I still hadn't mastered the idea of I am not my thoughts, which, has been really powerful for me, especially in my recovery from drugs and alcohol. Like if you think about cravings, one of the ways that I've been able to approach cravings now is really this understanding that what I'm thinking that's not necessarily doesn't define who I am. And so being able to differentiate those two things has been really important. I still don't think I really answered your question, though.
That's okay. That's brilliant information. So you're beginning, or you referred to your struggles with drugs and alcohol. Do you want to introduce us to that story? So let's see. I mean, mostly it was really with drugs. My primary drugs of use were marijuana, cannabis, and LSD. When did that start?
That really started kind of at the beginning of quarantine is when I had smoked weed before then, but really when I started using it on a daily basis was around the start of quarantine.
Can you tell us how old you are now?
Oh, yeah.
To give us reference when you're referencing back when you were younger. I want to know how old you are now. I mean, I know, but I want everybody to know.
I have to think about this. 1, 2, 22, 21. Wait, no, it'd be 21, 20, 19, so 3 years. So I would have been like 16.
Okay, but how old are you now?
Oh, I'm 19. Oh, I'm 20 now. I just had my birthday.
I thought you were counting how old you are now.
No, I had to count back. I can't remember. 2019 is just a weird amount of time away.
Yeah. Okay. So in the beginning of quarantine, we all know what that means.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd been really finding outlets for myself before then. I was really involved in school, a lot of extracurriculars, track, and I was part of student government. I was in charge of the yearbook, making the yearbook. I ran the business club, so I was very heavily involved after school, and that really was really good for me. I have a pretty busy mind, so being able to put it to work was a really great thing for me. And when things started to shut down, I really struggled, and I think an easy outlet for me, in terms of redirecting my mind's attention was smoking weed. It was a way to spend my time. It kind of filled the hours. And there were definitely parts of it, like if I look back, I think one thing that happens a lot in recovery is that I've noticed in recovery is this wholesale demonization of someone's time in addiction, right? There's a reason that I kept going back. It was fulfilling something for me. And so I think that's an important thing to remember looking at my life now, and in what ways am I fulfilling that now in a different way. In my addiction, it was really fulfilling, kind of this creative outlet for myself. I would spend most of the time listening to music, and it changed the chemistry in my brain in such a way that it allowed me to really listen and become observant to it. Now, in my sobriety, what I've realized is that's not something exclusive to drugs. It was something that there's this great analogy that I love that's used often when talking about meditation, this state of mind that is reached in meditation. And it's usually used in regard to psychedelics. So they describe a mountain climber climbing to the top of the mountain versus someone flying to the top with a helicopter, right? We both get to the same destination and we see the same beauty in things, but the way we got there is just so different that the mountain climber wouldn't call that climbing a mountain at all, right? We've seen the same vantage point, the same beauty that I found in using drugs, but I didn't put in the work to get there, and so it always disappeared. And so what I've found in my recovery is kind of like this more permanent state through meditation and through intentional living.
Okay, cool. What else do you want to tell us about your journey through drugs, and then we'll get to your sobriety?
Yeah, my journey through drugs. Let's see. Yeah, so it started when I was at the beginning of quarantine, and then kind of progressed. I mean, I reached a point where I was doing acid at least once a month. I mean, there was probably a good 3 or 4 month period where I was doing it, if not every other week, then every week, which was, kind of weird. It's it's like going through life in kind of a dreamlike state, especially at that age, I think, because it's such an age of real transformation, where you kind of come into yourself. So to have so much of that taken up by psychedelic experiences and really not being sober was no doubt was transformative, but also, if I look at how I am now, there's just so much that's the same from before that period in my life. So it was kind of like this weird period for 3 years where I really lost a lot of my curiosity for life, and I thought that's what I was exploring deeper, was kind of the curiosity. But it's just interesting, just the way it ended up expressing itself. And, I look back now and I realize just in all of the great ways that I'm able to experience life now.
How did it affect your life or your relationships or school, your anxiety?
Yeah. I would say that school was not really affected. I never really had a tough time in school. So that was actually one of the reasons why I would rationalize away why I was okay. It was well, I'm still doing great in school. So relationship wise, it really, really hurt my relationships. I think the nature of a lot of people in addiction is one of secrecy, which is no doubt tied to self-worth, right? Like I know I'm doing something shitty and can I?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
Beep.
Yeah. I'm doing something shitty and I know I'm doing something shitty. And so part of me was like, I want to keep from hurting people that I love. So I really kind of faded into myself, which was kind of like this double-edged sword, because now not only do I have no community with which to really interact and talk about how I'm struggling, but it also really hurt people who I was in relationship with. Yeah, it's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing.
How did you get sober?
Well, I jumped out a window and I broke both of my arms. So that was kind of my wake-up call. I mean, before that, I had really put a lot of... Oh, wait, maybe I should explain that first.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. It was almost a year ago. It was actually a year ago in 2 days. I jumped from my second story window and onto my neighbor's driveway under the influence of LSD. And yeah, I mean, I woke up in the hospital and I just, my first words were, I need help. And that's what I needed. And from that point, I've been able to really gain so much from the community of my family, and Rochester has a really fantastic recovery community as well, like really just so many meetings all of the time. So I was really able to take advantage of that and do a lot of work on myself. And that was certainly not something that it's not a point I wish to have gotten to, but I'm very grateful to be where I am now. And it's all, sometimes you have to hit your bottom. That's just the nature of it. I was actively trying to stop using drugs. I would keep like a log, like a notebook, where I would record my use and like try to taper off. But that's the thing about addiction. It's not as easy as like just
without any help either.
Yeah. So it was difficult. A lot easier after breaking both of my arms, because it's kind of hard to be like to justify it after that point. I mean, not to say that people don't, but like for me, it was really like, oh, like, yeah, I really could have died. So it seems like a small price to pay to like live my life. I don't think of it as a price at all anymore. It's really kind of a gift to be able to.
For a while, you couldn't get out.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that
helped.
Yeah, that helped too. Yeah. I mean, I was really under the care of my parents, and they were just so supportive of me and all of my extended family too, bringing food and sending well wishes, and just really supportive. Yeah. Not being able to get out certainly helped. But I think it was really the community and the support that I received that made the difference. I've seen a lot of recovery rooms that's not a support that people have, and I'm just really lucky to be able to, convalesce in such a supportive environment.
Yeah. And I realize it's not my time to talk, it's your time, but I wanted to at least acknowledge here, because I'm your aunt, I'm not just a stranger interviewing you.
Yeah.
And it's quite tender hearing you talk about this, because I witnessed it and it was incredible. The fact that you survived, it was a miracle, and we're so grateful for it.
Yeah.
But like you said, there was such a caring environment, and I wanted to second that. It was awe-inspiring watching your family mobilize and circle the wagons to take care of you with such thoughtfulness and presence and love.
Yeah.
Your parents and your siblings, they really came together. Jude's one of 5.
Yes, yeah. So they all came home luckily, which was, really great. And it's interesting to look back, because I can remember like the little things that really freaked me out. Like I had both of my arms in casts, so I had trouble putting on shirts and wearing long sleeves. So I bawled my eyes out, because I thought I was going to have to wear polo shirts for like the next four months or something. And my brother went to Goodwill and got me a ton of like extra large polo shirts, which is now, like you think about all the things that happened, and like, that's what I really chose to kind of cry over. But
like, it was so sweet. You were touched.
I was touched. I was also just kind of mad, because I really hate polos.
Did you wear any of them?
Yeah, I did. I wore all of them. And actually, I still wear a few to this day because I think they're kind of funny.
Yeah, there's a lot of surrender, isn't it, to have no arms?
Yeah, a lot of surrender. You really, I mean, it's hard to believe that it was less than a year ago. Yeah, I mean, I started playing guitar maybe 2 years ago, and so for 3 or 4 months, I really couldn't play guitar. I also had some jaw damage, so I had trouble eating for a while too, which is, like, just thinking about it now, like, I can open my mouth very wide, but, like, I couldn't before, and so it really just makes you grateful for so many things that you can take for granted.
I mean, you fell on your head.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it could have been.
That's pretty miraculous. You can't see him, but he's very handsome young man.
Thank you.
Taking applications for dates. No. Yeah. So that's neat in and of itself. You were kind of a little forced into sobriety, but you chose it from the moment you woke up.
Yes. Yeah. I decided that's what I wanted. And it's not something, like I said, it wasn't something that I had not considered before. I'd been doing that I had been almost a month sober at that point, actually, because I had just wanted to see if I could do it. And so, yeah, I mean, there was definitely still an interest beforehand of I was kind of done. But yeah, I mean, It served as the final straw for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had this time and space because you were sitting in recovery and recovering physically from the fall. How was the anxiety then? Because you're an overthinker, you're an active thinker, you're a very powerful mind, you're very intelligent. How was that? You were forced to be still, and
it was really hard. It was really, really hard. The other part of that, right? So I didn't really talk about this part too much, but if I also think about my cannabis use, that was a huge part of my anxiety. I think it's really easy to kind of write it off as an anxiety reliever, but just the state that it puts you in, the baseline that it puts you in is such a higher state of anxiety. And so, I was coming off of that. I was detoxing, really. And so for those first couple of weeks, I had a really, really hard time. I like to move a lot. I like to engage my mind, and I didn't really have as much of a space to do that. I was watching a lot of TV. I don't really care so much for TV shows. Yeah, that was hard. I was reading a little bit. Once I started reading, I really found that I controlled my anxiety a lot through reading, which I think makes sense because, it's like it's an escape.
Right.
And so I was just choosing a different escape at that point. I was reading Lord of the Rings. Really great series.
Some escapes are good escapes.
Yeah, some escapes are good escapes.
I am all for reading fiction to help with anxiety. I think it's really powerful. Because you're in relationship with the characters, and so you're engaged, not disengaged.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I've ever cried after a TV show ending or a movie ending, but I get really invested in books, and for those next couple days after I'm done, I really mourn the loss of that world because it's just so fascinating, and I really get so engrossed in it, and the characters and just the way that the author writes. I'm thinking of another series now, Aragon by Christopher Paolini. Just the language is so beautiful. I finished and then I couldn't read anything for like another week. I just had to like sit with what I had just read.
Yeah, transformative.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Yeah.
That's good. Okay. So you had to, so I like what you said about cannabis because I find that a lot with the people I work with is that when they're off cannabis, their anxiety goes down. And they think that they need to smoke to sleep or because it's the only thing that relieves them, but it feels like they're withdrawing when they're not on it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I was reaching a point where I would start having panic attacks, and I really do attribute that to my cannabis use. If I think about the periods in my life in which anxiety were the highest, which was really this period between 16 and 19, it was dominated by cannabis use. And so I think for sure that for me, what I came to realize is that it was really, really, really affected my anxiety. And yes, in like the short term, I don't even know if I would say in the short term, like when I would smoke weed, if that I felt like I had less anxiety. I think I I would get really paranoid, and I kind of enjoyed being paranoid. I would like go into a like a corner store or something, and I'd be like, oh, I wonder what everyone's thinking about me, which is just like, so that's also just like very, like egocentric, but I think that was part of the appeal of cannabis for me. It was like, oh, like I just felt so, it's kind of like
in a fishbowl.
Yeah, like in a fishbowl. It was like kind of like an escape room. Like I was just figuring out how to like deal with those emotions as they came up. But yeah, it certainly it was a very anxiety producing thing for me, and I think it is for a lot of people.
Yeah,
and I
when
think
they
it's
smoke.
Yeah,
they don't really feel a relief or a difference. It's hard to know what's causing it and what's
Right.
relieving it.
Right. I mean, it stays in your body. It's fat soluble, so it sticks around.
Yeah. So you're detoxing. You're sober a year ago, and the first few weeks was hard because you used to get active, do stuff, keep your mind really engaged. That's how you dealt with your anxiety, and you couldn't do that. What happened after those first few weeks?
Well, I started getting
anxiety?
into a rhythm, and so I was really doing a lot of stuff. I was going to drug counseling. I was in a group for drug counseling, which was nice. Other young people were in that with me. I was going to a lot of recovery meetings. I did 90 and 90, which for those unfamiliar is going to 90 meetings in 90 days. Which is really helpful. You just kind of get really ingrained in the recovery community. And what else did I do? I started working with a recovery coach as well, Robert Veeder. I think he's really instrumental into my long-term sobriety. His thing is really kind of being, like recovery is part of life, but life shouldn't be explicitly about recovery, right? And like
nice.
that's a big difference. So like when we have sessions, we'll go rock climbing, or like last week we did hot yoga. And then, in a couple days, we're going to go to a metal show. So it's like all these kind of things in which life occurs, and doing it with people who can appreciate the beauty of the world as it is, I think is really kind of what has changed a lot of it for me. But back to what you were asking about anxiety, I think it was getting out of my head a lot, and realizing that other people really struggle with this stuff too, and I'm not alone in it. And I don't have to be alone in it, was really powerful for me.
You stopped pushing people away. Like
that also made a huge difference, right? Like I lied a lot through my addiction, so to be in such complete honesty and really all of my relationships all of a sudden was a really powerful thing. It really kind of like took away this layer that I had constructed for so long of like, okay, well, what did I say to this person, and how does that line up with what I'm going to say to this person? Really just freed up so much bandwidth, that I was spending about worrying about making sure my story lined up. And you don't really have to make sure your story lines up when you are just telling your story as it is.
I mean, it's true.
Yeah.
I observed something else too that I feel like you've touched on. There was all of a sudden a lack of resistance. You know how you're talking about your stomach being tight and you were maybe like running away. So doing all these activities, you were always trying to keep yourself busy. There was a little bit of resistance to whatever it was, the fear was or something. And then there was a point in the beginning really this year that there was a shift. And you stop resisting things, and it was like there's this openness, which I think goes along with being truthful or being open or not pushing people away. There's a
I think you can only be as truthful with other people as you're being with yourself. I was uncomfortable for a lot of my youth. I think I just felt like my interests did not line up with what a lot of people were interested in. I love to talk about music. I loved listening to music. I was really curious. I asked a lot of questions, which had a tendency to annoy people, which makes sense. I would just like I would just nonstop ask questions, and like some of which I knew the answer to, but I just really liked asking questions. So what I think I found when I could just be, what I realized is that there are people who share those interests with me, and just because I wasn't exposed to them in my youth doesn't mean they aren't there, right? So like the communities that I'm a part of now really are things that are important to me and, that I'm passionate about. And so I think partly I felt like I wasn't really exploring my passions, or I didn't have maybe even the words around it to say what I was passionate about. But, like in going into
But not a sense of belonging.
Yeah, not a sense
with that.
Yeah, not a sense of belonging with that, right? So, and not a sense of belonging because no one else was doing that. And I think a lot of being one of 5, I think I really held on to this idea of kind of like following along. I can remember before I did any student government, I'd kind of like said to myself, like, I'm not going to tell my parents about this because none of my other siblings have done this. And so it wasn't so much shame as like, it was just like secrecy. Like I just didn't want them to know. Like it was just kind of like my thing, but that continued on. And so, yeah, what changed is this openness, to explore who I want to be more comfortable with who I am, and be able to be aware of my faults and shortcomings, and be able to recognize them.
Cool.
Yeah.
Tell me about your anxiety now.
Sorry, I feel like you keep asking me that, and then I just go...
No, I don't think... Did I ask you yet?
Oh, no, maybe...
I don't think so.
No, okay. My anxiety now... Oh, like my anxiety right now.
Yeah, not right this second, but I mean, like, given this, you're recovering all your learning and these sense of belongings and getting connected with the community and being open and honest, all the things you're talking about, how did it affect anxiety at all?
Yeah, so I think... if I look at my anxiety now, what I really have to talk about is like my consumption of different things. I think my anxiety in large part, what I found, so I'm mostly straight edge. So that means I'm vegan. I don't do drugs. What I found is that a lot of the processed food that I was eating did not help with my anxiety. Just around Christmas time this year, what I realized is I was just eating cookies all the time, and my anxiety was so high. And so my body is really sensitive to everything that I'm putting in it. And that's something that I kind of thought was kind of like BS. It's something that my mom was often about. Like she'd talk about like an efficient meal, and we'd kind of make fun of her for using the word efficient in a meal. We were all raised vegetarian, and there was a fair amount of disagreement over that, but not like we've all reverted back to being vegetarian now. And I I was just thanking her the other day for 11 years of vegetarianism, because it has made my body sensitive, and I'm aware of the ways that what I put in my body affect me. And so if I think about some of the ways that I'm most aware of when my anxiety peaks, I guess what I should say is that my anxiety in general is really manageable now. Part of that is, right, I'm on medication. I use an antidepressant at a high level, so I haven't been at a baseline while sober, so I have an interest in that, just because, like, if I'm looking at removing things to kind of see where I am initially, in the same way that I removed meat or drugs from my diet, like what does a Jude who's just living on food and water, what does that look like? But I'm also aware of like where I am right now, and it's a safe thing to be using these kind of drugs while I'm in such a transitionary period. So I'm weighing that out, and so I'm sure that helps with my anxiety. But really what I notice on a day-to-day basis is caffeine plays a big part in my anxiety. But if I don't use any kind of caffeine during the day and I get out and do physical exercise, it's really nominal, the amount of anxiety that I experience, and manageable in such a way that when I experience big bouts of anxiety, it's kind of...
You can pinpoint something?
Well, I can totally pinpoint something, but it's also like, oh my God, like this is just how I was for years, and I can't believe that this was my baseline.
Like sad for little Jude?
Yes, I mean, also just kind of like amazed at like... It's like when you have a thorn in your side and you don't realize that it's there until it's gone, like how different it can be.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, it's also really empowering now to know that it's not something that's permanent. And, I was looking through the first page of your book, and I know that's kind of one of the first things you touch on is this idea of, right, like, I know that this isn't going to be permanent. And that's a huge part of how I live my life now is recognizing the impermanence of, everything. I mean, anxiety, specifically when I'm thinking about how high my anxiety is, but all kinds of things. I mean, my cravings, happiness, sadness, joy, it all just kind of goes along with impermanence for me.
Cool.
Yeah.
You mentioned so many things that you use in a daily way, or you participate in a daily way to support yourself. Maybe we could just summarize by listing the things that you take to keep your mental health as good as you can.
Yeah. So I think I would start with my new understanding of kind of my relationship to my body and my mind. So I believe in like a body, mind, and soul. And so, a lot during a lot of the anxious years of my life, I think I was really just stuck in my head and I wasn't listening to my body, which is like the response for me that I describe as anxiety. It's like you're not listening to your body and what it needs. And so as I've done more meditation, I noticed this other thing that comes up, which is really like how the body controls the mind. And in meditation, that comes from this stillness and the belief that, still body, still mind. And so when I'm looking at that, that really has helped me to look at how they go hand in hand. And so if I were to sum it up in, 3 things that I do every day, I think I would probably say like diet. So I think one thing that's become really important to me is hydration. Just like being fully hydrated seems like a small thing, but it just like, I feel so much better after I drink a ton of water and I feel hydrated for the day. 2, for me, I get a little antsy when I don't have anything to do. And so I've gotten more comfortable when I'm either talking to people or just on my own, like playing guitar, just having something to do with my hands, because that's a way that I think I really express my anxiety, is through this restlessness of my body. And so that almost kind of goes opposite to what I'm saying about stillness. But, like in moments where I can't be still, it's been really helpful for me. Kind of helps me concentrate my thoughts. And then thirdly,
you could be meditative about movement too.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sure playing the guitar is very meditative in a lot of ways.
Yeah. There's a practice to it too, in the same way that there's a practice to meditation. And it's kind of moving from one thing to the next. But let's see, what would my third thing be?
You said exercise.
Exercise? Oh, I didn't say exercise yet, did I?
You have this whole time. But
exercise is probably the other big thing.
So eating right, hydrating, meditating, having something to do with your hands.
Yeah, well, I think what that comes down to is like a creative outlet.
Yeah,
and so that can also be reading, right? Like if I think about what reading a good fiction book is, it's getting into another world. And so, I mean, when I play music, it's the same idea. It's whereas music is maybe more of an outlet because like you're producing something. I can understand how someone might not feel the same way about reading, but like what my mind is creating while I'm reading is really what I'm talking about in terms of a creative outlet. Like the story and the visuals that are being created in my mind, I think is really just such a great creative outlet that I use on a daily basis.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, it's very validating to what I already told them this season, so that's really awesome. Yeah, it's been great sitting down with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for
hearing about your story.
For having me. This has been
anything
so much
else
fun.
you think you left out or I forgot to ask you about, or?
I don't know. I guess we didn't talk too much about like Generation Z, but what I would say in terms of that, I guess I don't know what I would say in terms.
What do you think about your generation and what's going on with them?
My generation kind of bugs me a little bit, but mostly just in the way that we interact. I think part of becoming very honest with myself has been this move towards interaction in a way that I enjoy, which is really face to face. So I'm not saying that I don't do this because I do this all the time, but I struggle sometimes when I see people with just like their heads in their phones all the time. So I make an active effort to not do that and really be present for the world around me. I guess I also have an open question as to what's so unappealing about this world that like we always go to our phones.
Do you think that's why people look at their phones, because the world's not appealing?
Well, I think it's an anxiety thing in part. I think, if I'm sitting in a room, and I do this now, if I'm sitting in a room and like just looking straight ahead, like it's weird. But if I'm on my phone, like looking at something, like that's more socially acceptable. So now I just like stare at a wall and think when I'm like in a waiting office.
You can stare at other people.
Yeah. Then I really get some attention. But yeah, like finding that, being comfortable, being uncomfortable, I think is a big part of what not using my phone has been for me. It's like a pacifier, something familiar.
Do you think your generation has trouble being uncomfortable?
I think that my generation has become familiar with being comfortable. I think that's kind of the default setting. And I think in a lot of the things that are being provided, it's like a lot of the things we do are like pacifiers in one way or another, like being on our phone and like consuming media. Sorry, this is getting like a little bit ranty. I don't mean it to get... I don't think we should have phones. That's all I'm saying. I don't think phones are good. But yeah, that's just what I believe. Yeah, I could talk about that for a while, but I won't.
I did. I had a whole episode on it.
Oh, on no phones?
Not no phones, but on how phones are affecting us.
Yeah, I think they provide a huge source of anxiety. When I think about social media and when I open social media, that primary trigger is really anxiety that I feel. It's like, oh, I haven't checked this recently. Like, I need to check it. And I know that it's probably...
Do you know what you're checking? Like, what are you checking?
Well, it's like the lottery thing. Are you familiar with that idea of like how refreshing social media and seeing if you have anything new is like, it gives you the same brain response as like running a lottery machine and like getting all sevens.
Oh, like a slot machine?
Yeah, a slot machine, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so...
interesting.
Yeah, and I can feel it. I can feel like the reward or disappointment when I do or do not have new notifications, which is just like a total hijacking of our brains,
Yeah. So what if you get a notification and then you check it and it's something boring?
And I turn off my phone, but then
sometimes like the notifications aren't very interesting.
Yeah, it's the buzz that's more exciting.
Yeah.
And I bring it back to addiction a lot because that's my experience, but they've also done studies about the process of making a drug deal is sometimes has the exact same effect on the brain as actually taking the drugs. It's like that same kind of idea, right? It's like this, you might get something. There's the chance of you getting a notification. That's like what's the appealing part. And you don't know if you're going to get one.
And then you're sad if you don't.
Yeah. And then I spend time on social media. So that's kind of one of my big 2023 goals is to spend less time on my phone.
How are you going to do that?
Well, I surround myself with people now who really don't use their phones. And so really from the hours of when I'm at work, when I'm working, which is at a guitar repair shop from the hours of 11 and 5, I'm really not on my phone because I just enjoy being present so much. And so I guess if I'm looking at this coming year, what I really want to do is focus on becoming more present and being in situations where I feel present so that I don't feel the need to look at my phone. Excuse me, I just want to enjoy the moment.
Excellent. All right, cool. What are some messages of hope you want to send out to young people younger than you, people your age, maybe a little older?
I think it can all change, and the amount of time it takes to change is kind of misleading because when you start changing your behaviors, it feels like this huge mountain. But looking back, like I'm about to come up on 1 year sober, and it's like, it doesn't feel like that long of a time. It's really just day by day that you continue to make the decisions that will lead you in the right direction. And every day is different. Yeah, and I think really believing in your ability to do that and be your own change maker has been really important to me, you know? Like, I have the power to change myself. I think that's one of the most important things that I've really developed this year.
Do you know how you learned that? Like, was there a story about when you learned your power?
Okay, I would say that goes back a little bit to, community. And so one way I heard it expressed really well is kind of like, my courage and my faith is like a candle. And sometimes other people have to hold that candle. And so I've had people in my life who've been able to hold that candle for me and remind me of, no, you can do this. Like, I believe in you. And having someone that believes in you, even if it's not yourself initially, is so important, because I know, especially for myself, I really, in that early time, I relied a lot on what other people thought of me. So to surround myself with people who knew me as I wanted to be, I think is so important and continues to be really important to me.
Okay. So sometimes people held your candle for you when you couldn't hold it, or held hope for you, or believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself.
Yeah.
That helped you be able to take your candle back sometimes.
Right.
Not that they stopped holding it, but they relit yours or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I can think about that, right? If I think about my relationship with Robert, my recovery coach, a lot of the things we did put me really outside my comfort zone. And I'd be like, I don't really want to do this, or like, I can't do this. And he's like, yeah, you can. Yeah, I know you can. And it was like a little bit frustrating because I knew he was right, but like,
what did he make you do?
Oh, just like all kinds of things. Like, we would go early on, we would always go for runs. And so it would be like, we meet at like 6 a.m. at a park on a Friday, and it's like 30 degrees out, and we'd go for a run. And I'd be like, Robert, I just do not want to do this right now. And he's like, yeah, me neither, but let's go do it. And it's kind of like that, that. So
he's getting you used to being uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And being okay with it.
Yeah, and as time has gone on, I've gotten to be the one that's pushed him a little bit, and I'm trying to get him to go skydiving because he has a fear of heights, but we're taking that one step at a time.
I'll go with you.
Yeah. Oh, really?
I went when I was your age.
Oh, really? Yeah, I'm really hoping to do that before the summer.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I like this metaphor of the candle.
Yeah.
So he keeps inviting you to hold your own candle.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't want to hold it, but he's like, hold it.
Yeah, and he's also ready to hold it for me. Not like I'm giving it to him, but it's like, my candle isn't lit right now, and he knows that it can be.
Sharing.
Sharing, right. So he's just always providing that kind of hope for me, which is so important, I think, in whatever kind of life you want to live. Believing in yourself is a really important part of living your best life, I think.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we all believe in you.
Thank you.
We always knew you were going to do great things, and we're here to see it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having this conversation and your frankness and openness.
Yeah, of course. It's been great to talk with you, and thank you for all of your insightful questions.
No problem. Yeah, I think it's going to help a lot of people know
so.
that they're not alone.
Yeah.
And maybe they could think about you and I holding the candle for them and reaching out through this audio and lighting their candle, that we believe in that. Even though I don't know the people listening.
Right.
I believe in them because I've seen people overcome such difficulty. And so we are right now holding out that flame for you. Thank you so much for listening to this bonus episode of Anxiety. I'm so done with you. With me, Dr. Jodi. In this episode, Jude and I have been talking about his journey through anxiety and drug use, and how he has been doing the work on being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and managing his anxiety through community and daily practices that keep him feeling good. Come on over to my blog post that goes along with this episode for more resources for your recovery journey. The link to that is in the show notes. Please don't forget to leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And while you're waiting for season 2 to drop, come on and hang out with me on TikTok at Dr. Jodi.